Most people don't realize what happens inside the brain the moment alcohol enters the system. Regardless of who you are or where you come from, the first effect is almost identical for everyone. The regions at the front of the brain responsible for self-control, planning, and thoughtful decisions begin to dim. The center that organizes memories begins to quiet down. It's subtle in the beginning, so subtle you barely feel it. Yet those shifts set the stage for what comes next. After those early changes, people fall into two very different paths. One group starts feeling drowsy after a few drinks, as if their whole system wants to shut down. The other group experiences something entirely different. Instead of getting tired, they become more activated, more socially energized, sometimes even unusually alert. And that difference is not random. It speaks volumes about a person's biological wiring and hints at who may be more vulnerable to developing harmful drinking patterns as time goes on. No two individuals metabolize alcohol the same way. And yes, pace, type, and combinations can make certain afternoons turn out differently. But beneath all those surface variables lies something deeper. The way alcohol reshapes your internal communication systems. One of the most striking and least talked about impacts happens in a part of the brain that barely anyone thinks about until something goes wrong. There is a tiny control hub just above the roof of your mouth, no bigger than a large candy, that regulates some of the most primitive forces in your behavior. Rage, desire, hunger, thirst, temperature, fear, comfort. This command center talks directly to a small gland hanging just outside the brain. And that gland sends chemical messengers into your bloodstream that communicate with two little organs in your lower back. Together, these three parts form the main stress response network of your entire body. Alcohol doesn't respect boundaries because it dissolves easily in both water and fat. It can slip into nearly every cell in your brain. And once it reaches that tiny command hub, it disturbs that communication line between the brain's signals and the body's hormonal responses. Normally, the brain decides what counts as a threat or challenge and sends instructions to the gland. Then the gland releases chemicals that tell your body how to respond. Those chemicals include the substance that gives you a burst of energy when you're scared, and another hormone that handles longer-lasting stress. This system is supposed to keep you balanced, not too reactive, not too numb, just stable enough to move through life with steady nerves. But when drinking becomes part of someone's weekly rhythm, whether that means one drink every night, or a heavier evening only on weekends, or a few drinks here and there that feel harmless, something else begins to happen. Your brain starts resetting the way it judges stress. Once alcohol becomes a regular visitor, the entire stress circuit becomes more reactive, even when you are nowhere near a drink. That means the baseline level of stress hormones creeping through your bloodstream becomes higher. So when you're sober, instead of feeling calm, you feel tense. Instead of feeling steady, you feel uneasy. Instead of relaxing easily, you feel a pressure you can't explain. And most people never connect this rising tension to the nights they drink, because this effect doesn't show up while drinking. It only shows up when the glass is empty. This is the part almost no one talks about. People often describe how alcohol calms them down in the moment. Someone comes home exhausted, overwhelmed, frustrated, and the drink softens everything. Muscles loosen, thoughts slow down, worries feel distant. That part is real. But what is also real is what happens the next morning, or the next evening, or on any day without alcohol. The stress system becomes louder. The body releases more stress hormone than it should. And that extra stress makes a person feel more anxious, even when nothing stressful is happening. It becomes a silent loop. The drink relaxes you temporarily. Then your body becomes more stressed during the hours you are sober, which makes the next drink feel even more necessary. And slowly, without meaning to, people begin to train their brain to rely on alcohol, not for pleasure, but just to feel normal again. Some people are genetically wired to be more vulnerable to this loop from the very beginning. Traits they inherited can tilt their brain chemistry in a way that makes alcohol feel exceptionally rewarding or unusually stimulating. But even without a genetic push, repeated exposure creates its own momentum. For some individuals, the longer they drink in a single evening, the more alert they become, not less. They don't get sleepy, they get activated, they get focused, they get strangely energized. That false burst of alertness is not a sign of strength or tolerance. It is the stress circuitry being artificially pushed. And once this starts happening repeatedly, that circuitry begins to change permanently. The brain loves efficiency. If something keeps happening over and over, it rewires itself to expect that pattern. So when someone has been drinking regularly for months or years, even if it's not excessive, even if it's what most people would consider normal, the brain and hormone systems adapt to the presence of alcohol. They don't adapt in a positive or helpful direction. They adapt by weakening the natural calm the body should have. They adapt by making stress feel sharper. They adapt by shrinking the sense of ease someone used to rely on. Little by little, life feels more pressured, more chaotic, more emotionally unstable. And there's something even more troubling underneath. Once these networks shift, a person starts needing more alcohol not to get blissfully intoxicated, but simply to reach the level of calm they used to have before they ever drank at all. Their baseline has been dragged downward. Pleasure feels flatter. Stress feels heavier. Calm feels harder to access. And alcohol starts filling a role it was never meant to fill, the role of artificial balance. It becomes the shortcut to comfort because the natural pathways have been worn down by repeated stimulation. This isn't about moral judgment or blaming people for personal choices. It's biology. It's chemistry. It's how the nervous system adapts to substances that interfere with survival circuits. And the patterns that create these long-lasting shifts aren't extreme. They don't require someone to drink recklessly. They don't require dramatic binges or dangerous situations. They can emerge from habits that appear completely ordinary, patterns that millions of people participate in without realizing the long-term cost. Walk through any airport on a sunny afternoon or any weekend restaurant, and you'll see exactly the kind of drinking behavior that slowly shapes the brain in the wrong direction. Not binge drinking, not crisis situations, just casual consumption that feels harmless. But the body keeps score, and the brain keeps adjusting. And while a drink can temporarily soothe, the overall direction of these neural changes moves toward more stress, lower mood, reduced resilience, and a growing need for alcohol to feel balanced again. There is a turning point in this journey that most people don't recognize until they reach it. It's the moment when they realize the discomfort they feel during sobriety is not weakness, not personality, not sensitivity. It is biology pushing back after being conditioned for too long. When someone drinks regularly, even if it seems moderate, the nervous system begins organizing itself around alcohol the same way it organizes itself around food, sleep, and safety. Slowly, alcohol becomes woven into the internal map the brain uses to decide what brings relief. And once something becomes part of that map, the body expects it. So when it's not there, the system produces a quiet alarm: uneasiness, irritability, heaviness, restlessness. That alarm is not dramatic enough to be called withdrawal in the classic sense, but it's powerful enough to influence mood and behavior in ways people barely notice. It's the reason someone feels oddly tense during a week without drinking, or why small annoyances hit harder, or why sleep feels shallow. The body is searching for the missing piece it learned to rely on. Understanding this changes everything. People often interpret their reaction to alcohol as a personality trait. But it is not a matter of personality. It's circuitry being shaped, molded, and remodeled by repetition. And this remodeling doesn't only affect stress. It influences motivation, pleasure, emotional resilience, and the ability to find satisfaction in ordinary life. When alcohol repeatedly lowers the brain's natural stress chemicals, the brain compensates by raising those chemicals higher than normal when alcohol leaves the system. When alcohol keeps activating reward pathways artificially, those pathways become less responsive to life's natural pleasures. And when alcohol repeatedly pushes certain circuits into overdrive, those circuits become more sensitive, more reactive, more unstable. This creates a cycle where the world feels slightly harsher, slightly louder, slightly more stressful. Over time, it becomes difficult to remember what feeling balanced without alcohol even looks like. Yet the human brain is remarkable. It can drift into unhealthy patterns, but it can also rebuild itself with stunning depth if given the chance. The same neuroplasticity that once wired the brain toward dependence can, with time, rewire it toward clarity. When someone steps away from alcohol long enough, their stress circuits begin recalibrating. The constant pressure inside the body starts decreasing. The baseline level of anxiety begins softening. The chemical storm created by months or years of repeated drinking slowly fades. And as those systems settle, people begin experiencing a kind of internal quiet they had forgotten was possible. It feels strange at first, like walking into a room where the noise suddenly turned off. But after a while, that quiet begins to feel natural again. The early phase of this shift is uncomfortable. Not because anything is getting worse, but because the brain is relearning how to regulate itself without assistance. It's like taking training wheels off a bike after using them for years. At first, there is wobbling, uncertainty, frustration. The body is relearning how to produce calm on its own. It is relearning how to dampen stress naturally. It is relearning how to feel reward without artificial stimulation. And that process is both physical and emotional. The mind feels exposed during this period, as if old memories or buried stress suddenly surface. But that exposure is a sign that the fog alcohol created is lifting. The clarity that begins returning doesn't always feel gentle. Sometimes it feels raw. But rawness is not a mistake. It is the beginning of healing. And then something subtle begins happening. Sleep deepens, not every night, but gradually. Mornings become less heavy. Thoughts move with more direction instead of drifting. Decisions feel clearer. Mood becomes less fragile. You start noticing things. The quiet in your chest after a deep breath. The way colors look sharper in daylight. The satisfaction of doing something without needing a reward to enjoy it. The brain is reclaiming its natural rhythms. Hormones that once swung wildly begin stabilizing. Stress chemicals that once spiked constantly begin calming. The reward system, which had been muted for so long, starts waking up. And with that awakening comes something people don't expect: a renewed sense of self. Alcohol blurs identity. It numbs emotional edges in a way that makes everything feel slightly distant. Once the brain begins healing, those edges return, not to overwhelm, but to reconnect you with your own life. You start feeling emotions more authentically. Joy feels brighter. Sadness feels cleaner. Confidence begins reappearing in small ways, in the way you carry yourself, in the way you handle challenges, in the way you speak with others. This restoration is not dramatic. It's gradual, like light entering a room through slowly opening curtains. But one day you wake up and realize that the emotional heaviness you thought was part of your personality was actually a side effect of the stress circuitry alcohol had been twisting for years. As these internal systems strengthen, something even more powerful unfolds. Your motivation to rely on alcohol naturally fades because the foundation it once disrupted is becoming stronger than the habit that once held it together. With each week of healing, the brain becomes less interested in alcohol's artificial comfort. It begins preferring the calm it can produce on its own. And this shift is not based on willpower. It is biology rewiring itself in a healthier direction. The desire for alcohol doesn't vanish overnight, but it becomes softer, less demanding, less convincing. You come to recognize the difference between a craving and a memory. A craving is the body calling out for balance. A memory is the mind remembering a pattern. Once your system regains its balance, the craving loses its voice. Eventually, you reach a point where you can see the entire cycle clearly. You understand how alcohol once created stress rather than reducing it. You understand how it pushed your mood downward even while pretending to lift it. You understand how it carved pathways in your brain that made the world feel heavier. And with that understanding comes freedom. Not the freedom from alcohol itself, but the freedom from believing you need it. You begin to trust your body again. You begin to trust your mind again. You begin to trust yourself again. The most powerful part of this transformation is realizing that none of this healing requires perfection. It doesn't require never making mistakes. It doesn't require flawless discipline. It requires persistence, honesty, and the willingness to give your brain the time it needs to reset. Every day without alcohol is a quiet victory. Every moment of discomfort is a step toward rewiring. Every small shift in mood or clarity or energy is proof that the brain is rebuilding itself exactly as nature designed it to. And as weeks turn into months, you eventually return to the version of yourself that lived underneath the alcohol-induced noise. A version with steadier thoughts, deeper calm, sharper focus, stronger emotional resilience, and a sense of inner alignment that feels almost unfamiliar because of how long it was absent. But it is not new. It was always there, waiting patiently. And once it comes back, you carry it with you in every part of your life.